For 3+ quarters, the Seahawks gave a valiant effort in Santa Clara against the 49ers, but unfortunately, they were undone by many of the same issues that cost them against their division rivals only 3 short weeks ago. We're going to be breaking down a 4th consecutive loss for the Seahawks here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Another difficult loss for the Seahawks. The first time in the Pete Carroll era, they have lost 4 consecutive games. The second of those losses now coming against the 49ers, this time on the road. Rob, it was a game that felt pretty close, as we'll be talking about as we get deeper into this post-game episode. However, just not enough plays made on offense and defense for the Seahawks to have a chance to pull the upset in a 28-16 defeat at Levis Stadium. This post-game episode is brought your way by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. The Seahawks traveled down to Levis Stadium for a rematch with the 49ers, and things couldn't have gotten off to a worse start for the Seahawks. Literally, the first play of the game, Christian McCaffrey races 72 yards with Jamal Adams and a bunch of other defenders in trail. And really, Rob, even though the Seahawks defense did rebound after that point, at least for the next 3 or 4 drives, that play symbolized how this game and really how this rivalry is right now. It seems like the Seahawks, especially their best players, they are in trail against this football team at all times. The 49ers just seem to have 2 steps in front of them at all times. Even when it feels like the Seahawks are being more competitive, the Seahawks do not have enough answers. The 49ers always find a way to get the job done, and that has particularly been the case when it comes to explosive plays. I said on our Friday podcast, Seattle needed to hold them to 7 or fewer explosive plays. They gave up 7 pass plays of 20+ yards, 3 of those being 40 or more yards. 2 of those were touchdowns in this game. I think it's safe to say they did not check off that box.
No, they certainly did not. And I think that when you look at these 2 teams, Corbin, it did feel like it was a much closer game than the 12-point difference in the final tally. Certainly, it was an improvement of what we saw when the Seahawks were, roasted at home on Thanksgiving just a couple of weeks ago. But at the same time, I think you can go position by position and argue that the 49ers are just physically better than the Seahawks at just about every single position. And so I think this was a predictable outcome. I think that there was a lot of people out there who probably watched this game and were pleasantly surprised that Seattle played as competitively as they did, especially with the news that Drew Lock would in fact be getting the start in this game. I thought that Drew Lock played fairly well. But when you break it all down and you notice that as productive as the Seahawks were on offense, the 49ers had 200 more yards on offense, as many big plays the Seahawks had. The 49ers averaged 9.9 yards per play in this football game. I mean, it was absolute demolition of the Seahawks on defense. And while there were some splashy plays from the Seahawks on offense, at the same time, there just wasn't enough consistency there to really think that they were going to be able to go into Levi's Stadium and do anything other than suffer this loss.
Statistics do not always paint the most accurate picture when you are looking at least raw yardage, but this game, it certainly does. When you look at, as you mentioned, 9.9 yards per play, even the Big 12 teams are thinking, what's wrong with our defense if you give up almost 10 yards per play and just explosive after explosive, 3 plays of 40+ yards, and 2 of them being touchdowns. George Kittle catching one of those, a 54-yarder to Deebo Samuel, which I don't know what Jamal Adams was doing on that play. The announcers were trying to paint a picture that he was biting on a dig route, but he cannot let Deebo Samuel get past him as a deep safety. And that's exactly what he allowed to happen. Couldn't catch up with him once he had raced past him. It's plays like that. And really, you look at the people that are involved in the play. Right now, to me, the biggest difference between these two football teams, you can look at the physicality, and I think that there's a point to make on that front as well. But I think the biggest difference, and we talked about this a little bit on last week's episode, one of our episodes last week, that this football team, the highest paid players on the roster, they are not playing like stars. You look at the 49ers, the guys that are getting big paychecks, the Nick Bosa's of the world, the Deebo Samuels of the world. They kill the Seahawks every single time these two teams get together. So you've got one team who the stars rise to the occasion. You got another team where the stars give up touchdowns in coverage, miss tackles, and get in trouble for penalties post-snap. They're more physical post-snap than they are during the play. Those kind of mistakes, when your highest paid players are doing that, you aren't going to beat really good football teams, even if you give yourself a little bit of a chance, which I felt like the Seahawks did at times in this game. I mean, they were only down 4 at halftime. They cut it within 5 midway through the third quarter. There were opportunities there to make this a very competitive game. And at the same time, when your stars are not rising to the occasion, the Jamal Adams is the Quandre Diggs is the world, the guys that are making the big money, not coming through with big plays and allowing big plays left and right. Your offense having its struggles time to time with guys getting penalties, disappearing for large chunks of the game. I mean, that to me is the difference right now between these two teams. There's a talent discrepancy, but the biggest issue is the stars on one team are producing, the stars on the other one, they're not playing to the money that they're being paid. And we saw it again for the second time in 3 weeks against the 49ers. The star power, it's a huge difference right now. The gap between the Seahawks and 49ers, that right there to me characterizes the differences between these teams. We saw it again today at Levis Stadium.
Well, and that was one of the things I thought was most frustrating. I'll talk specifically about DK Metcalf here for a moment. Obviously, he is the highest paid wide receiver in Seahawks franchise history. And for him to make the incredible catch and an incredible throw by Drew Lock to get that score and give a resounding answer to the 49ers marching down the field in 2 plays, of course, and getting the opening score of this football game. I mean, it was very encouraging to see the resiliency for an accuracy from Drew Lock and to see a spectacular play by DK Metcalf. But then for the Seahawks, I was just completely befuddled by the fact that the Seahawks didn't prioritize getting DK Metcalf the football after that. I mean, certainly in the fourth quarter, they started getting him the ball a few more times, but he is one of those players that is just so competitive. He's just wired that way that if you allow him to get distracted, then you are going to have, especially when you start to lose the football game, you're going to have these outbursts. And so to me, that was one of the things is I feel like not only do the Seahawks players that are getting paid an awful lot of money struggle to step up when the lights are brightest. It feels like sometimes the play calling, both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, is struggling to put the Seahawks star players in position to be successful. Whereas that, I think, is one of the real calling cards of the Kyle Shanahan and his entire coaching staff in San Francisco.
Yeah, you've got one coaching staff that seems to know how to get the most out of those star players, and then you've got another coaching staff, and I don't know who takes the most blame for this, but the head coach is going to get most of the blame when you lose 4 games in a row. It's the first time it's ever happened in Pete Carroll's tenure, but you have all these talented players, especially somebody like Metcalf who gets off to a hot start, and then he is non-existent. Like, there has got to be an emphasis, whether you're Shane Waldron or Pete Carroll directly going over and say, we got to find ways to scheme some plays up to get him the football, especially when Charvarius Ward exited with an injury and didn't return in the first quarter. The 49ers are down their best corner. Those are the kind of things, if the Seahawks lose Reek Woolen, or in this case, they lost Devin Witherspoon, and where did they start attacking? Where Devin Witherspoon lines up, and they started getting some of those chunk plays off that. Once he exited with a back injury, that was a turning point as well. But the 49ers had a bunch of guys go down. You can't use injuries as an excuse. At the end of the day, your stars and your coaches, they are not stacking up with the best of the best, and that's why you are not winning or really being competitive. They were competitive at times in this game, but still, this game could have been much worse than what it was. The 49ers made enough mistakes in this game that were self-inflicted. It still felt pretty one-sided down towards the end of this football game. And the Seahawks just aren't getting enough from their highest paid players and their coaches to be able to compete against teams like this. And oh, by the way, they got the Philadelphia Eagles coming to town next Monday night. So things are not going to get easier for a team that is now 6-7. They could have taken advantage of the Rams losing today and gotten back in the wild card hunt. Didn't take advantage of that as they lose their 4th consecutive game. When we come back, we're going to get to our game balls. Yes, they lost, but the Seahawks still had several players that shined in defeat. We'll be looking at offense, defense, and special teams coming up next here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Why root for your team on an empty stomach? That's a game day travesty that ensures you won't be cheering at your very best. Order on DoorDash and save on football watch party favorites. Right now, you can get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order using the DoorDash app and entering the code LOCK23. When I'm kicking it back and watching the game with friends and family, especially when I'm not reporting, I love to order Jet City Pizza, my favorite gluten-free pizza in the Seattle region. Of course, you got to have that 2-liter root beer and cinnamon sticks for the rest of the party. DoorDash makes the process so easy. I don't have to leave the comfort of my couch for delicious, great-tasting food before and after kickoff. It's that simple. Ready to satisfy your taste buds on game day? Quench those cravings with your favorite local restaurants via DoorDash. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order. Downloading the DoorDash app and entering the code LOCK23. Subject to change. Terms apply. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is Corbin Smith, your lead host. Glad to be joined for our post-game show by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Seattle or over in Amsterdam. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you that makes Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Don't forget, coming up on Monday, I'm going to be riding solo for this show, but we will have Monday musings, Monday mailbag, and much more jam-packed episode continuing to break down, unfortunately, another loss for the Seahawks. You won't want to miss it. Let's get to our game balls now. The Seahawks falling 28-16 at Levis Stadium. It was a game that the Seahawks, it felt like they had chances at least in the first 3.5 quarters. They had opportunities to make this game really interesting and just couldn't make quite enough plays on offense, defense, and special teams to pull off the upset. Let's get to those game balls now. There's always players that shine even in defeat, and I think it's pretty obvious, Rob, who deserves the offensive game ball given the circumstances and the opponent that the Seahawks were playing today.
Yeah, at least for me, it's going to be Drew Lock. I think that, sometimes this is, pretty low-hanging fruit when you go with the quarterback as the player who deserves the most praise or the most blame. But as you said, I mean, it's just the quality of the opponent, the fact that you're on the road, the fact that Drew Lock only had the one day really where he had a full practice, and that was on Friday, which is basically a walkthrough type of a practice. Anyway, there's not a lot of installation of the game plan during that time. So he really was dealt a very difficult hand in this football game. And I just thought that he demonstrated the moxie, the just pure arm strength and accuracy. That is one of the reasons why I really thought that he was going to be the quarterback who was going to wind up being the guy after Russell Wilson left town. So I got to give him some credit. There were, I thought the long interception to DK Metcalf was, just basically like a thrown punt. I was not a big fan of that particular play. And certainly there was another play where that he basically crossed the line of scrimmage or crossed the line and then threw a ball and got himself a penalty. But other than that, I thought they played a very clean game, despite having a ton of pressure in his face throughout this football game. And again, I thought that some of the throws that he made down the field and also showing his willingness to get outside the pocket and run, something we haven't seen Geno Smith do, even though they're both very similarly gifted athletes. To me, it was one of the more encouraging things from the Seahawks, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, the big reason that he is my game ball winner is that pocket presence that you were mentioning. And there were a few times late in the game where he was not able to get away from Nick Bosa. Most quarterbacks in that situation would not have been able to get away from one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. And the offensive line was put in a really tough spot there where the Seahawks had to pass. They were trailing by double digits. That really allowed Bosa and company to pin their ears back and made it tough on Lock. But we saw several plays. There's one in particular where he was able to bail the pocket to his right, and he hit Tyler Lockett after he improvised his route and picked up big yardage there. Lockett quietly had a very solid game, and I actually had both of the third down conversions for the Seahawks. So Lockett was a player that I actually considered for this, but at the end of the day, 269 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, a passer rating north of 90. If you would have told me before the game that Drew Lock was going to put numbers up like that, even with the 2 interceptions, I'm not blaming him for the second one. His arm got hit, ball popped up in the air. That might have been a big play if he didn't get hit, but the pass protection broke down again. You put those stats in front of me, though, I would think that the Seahawks had a decent chance in this game with those kind of numbers from Drew Lock, and they were able to get a few decent runs sprinkled in there. The overall rushing numbers were not good, too many negative plays, but still, Drew Lock was given a little bit of support early in the game with the run game. He was able to have some success off play action. He moved the pocket. There was a lot to be encouraged by with this spot start for Drew Lock against the 49ers. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, when you give up over 500 yards and almost 10 yards per play, it's difficult to find a player that jumps out and say, hey, I'm going to give you a game ball. But they did hold the 49ers to just 28 points. So you got to give the Seahawks some credit there. There was a lot of garbage yardage in this game, and they were able to create a few turnovers. Julian Love made both those turnovers, but at least for me, Rob, Julian Love gave up a 40-plus yard touchdown to George Kittle in coverage. I can't quite give him the game ball because of that big play that he allowed, but I thought Leonard Williams had another really good game. He had a sack. He had 4 quarterback hits. I mean, they were getting some pressure on Brock Purdy. Unfortunately, there were just too many times where receivers were still able to get open while he was getting hit, and Brock Purdy was able to make magic happen. Sometimes you just got to tip your cap to the other player on the other team, but Leonard Williams was really active. He drew a couple holding penalties in this game as well. On an afternoon where a lot of defensive linemen struggled, particularly against the run, I thought he made a couple nice plays in the middle as well. So to me, Leonard Williams, from start to finish, had the most complete game for the Seahawks on defense without that huge mistake like Julian Love had.
Yeah, I agree with you. They did a nice job on the Fox broadcast of, just kind of tipping their cap to the future Hall of Fame left tackle, the 49ers, Trent Williams, and how consistently he was able to clear space off on the left side. But the 49ers struggled when it came to trying to run the ball up the middle. And that was, of course, one of the matchups, Corbin, that you and I highlighted going into this game, is that we really thought that the Seattle had a huge advantage there with Leonard Williams, as well as Jaron Reed. To me, he would have been another candidate for this. He also had a sack, also had, I believe, 3 or 4 tackles in this game, and just provided the physicality, the intensity that I think that the Seahawks needed to have in this game. I thought that they demonstrated that from the outset. They were productive as both run defenders and pass defenders in terms of their pass rush. As you noted, Leonard Williams had a couple of different times had holding calls that were called by the blockers attempting to slow him down. So again, I think that there were definitely plenty of negatives in this football game from a Seahawks perspective, but I think that one of the obvious silver linings of this game is the play of Big Cat.
And you look at the rushing numbers the 49ers put up, Rob, they averaged 7.5 yards per carry on the ground. But I think if you go back and you chart the run plays, almost all of that big production came running off tackle. The 49ers did not have success running between the tackles today. When they tried to, they got stuffed for short yardage. When they got outside the tackle, though, especially on toss sweeps like that opening play that went 72 yards, the Seahawks over pursued. They flopped trying to go after the ball carrier, arm tackles. It was just ugly. And interior-wise, those guys held up pretty well, but the 49ers are not a poorly coached team. They attacked the area that they knew they were having success, and they continued to do so throughout the game. On special teams, Jason Myers only had 1 field goal in this game. Michael Dixon punted several times. You could put Michael Dixon on here, but there's one play that jumps out in special teams. John Radigan flying downfield with his long hair on fire, and he blew up the kick returner for a 3-yard return. That really ignited the sidelines, and he led the team. He had 2 special teams tackles in this game. There's a reason they have kept him around, even though he doesn't play on defense, with Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, and Devin Bush all being ahead of him on the depth chart. He is a core special teams guy, that does such a good job getting downfield and finding the ball carrier. He absolutely lit that dude up. In fact, I think it was Deebo Samuel that he brought down, which made it even more impressive. We know how hard it is to tackle him. He hit stick him in Madden terms. That was really fun to watch. So this was an easy one for me, picking number 59.
Yeah, I definitely agree that John Radigan had a very impressive game on special teams. That big hit was, kind of laid the foundation for Seattle. I thought that Julian Love also had a couple of tackles on special teams that I thought were impressive. And then I have to acknowledge Artie Burns. I mean, the Seahawks basically were caught with their pants down a little bit on the fourth down fake, basically, that was that fake punt. And for Artie Burns, Ronnie Bell, the wide receiver for the 49ers that got caught with an illegal block. I think that basically, again, the Fox telecast described it correctly, that Ronnie Bell just fell on the ground. But still, I think that Artie Burns did a heck of a job of just kind of falling over the top and drawing that flag. And so that basically, it was like a turnover for the Seahawks. I mean, that was a huge play in that game. And I thought that it showed kind of the veteran presence of Artie Burns, because once he fell over, he pointed to the ref and kind of elicited some attention. And again, I thought that him getting that penalty flag drawn, obviously wound up being, something that forced the 49ers to repunt that football, give the Seahawks the ball back. They went down, scored after that. So that was a real turning point in this football game. So a little bit of acknowledgement to Artie Burns as well.
And as a running back guy, I got to give Wisnowski some credit, man. He looked fast there on that 30-yard run, and that really did feel like a situation where a guy just tripped up and inadvertently had an illegal block, but the refs called it. They saw it that way. I probably would have thrown a flag there with the way that looked in real-time speed. But, yeah, that was a big play for Artie Burns, and it helped the Seahawks, no doubt about it. We're going to get to our 3-up, 3-down stock watch coming out today's game. Which players had big games against the 49ers and who will be looking to bounce back against the Eagles on Monday Night Football next week. We'll get to that next year on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You don't have to battle thousands of other players, pros, and sharks. It's just you picking more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections to watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play, and I can make all my selections and submissions in less than 60 seconds. Now that basketball season's here, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball specials leagues. That includes, for example, Steph Curry and Jack Smith and Jigba at 10.5 3-pointers plus receptions. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if your players get injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. That's a huge deal because Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform that offers injury insurance policies. Prize Picks is an absolute blast each week, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without the hassle and land quick winnings. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks falling to 6-7 of the season, suffering a 4th consecutive loss at the hands of the 49ers, a 28-16 defeat at Levis Stadium. Certainly some players that played well in defeat for the Seahawks. They were hanging tough for most of this game, Robin. Starting on the offensive side of the football with our 3-up segment, who's a player on offense that really stood out to you that increased their stock or at least played well given the circumstances?
It's funny because we started off the show talking about Drew Lock and just the pinpoint accuracy that we saw in DK Metcalf. I thought that was a brilliant catch that he made. But to me, the play on offense that I was the most excited about was the little fake make you miss that Zach Charbonnet showed. He made Dre Greenlaw miss in the wide open field where Dre Greenlaw is one of the absolute best. Fred Warner, his cohort of the 49ers, of course, gets all kinds of credit, as he should. He's a phenomenal player. but Dre Greenlaw is a heck of a player as well. And we know that Charbonnet is a battering ram. He has demonstrated that on many occasions so far this season. This is rookie season for the Seahawks, but the little kind of shoulder dip and go was a very nice move that wound up being Seattle's biggest run from scrimmage in this football game. And I thought, again, was very encouraged by that, because to me, that remains the strategy I think that the Seahawks need to try to incorporate more often, is just run the damn ball. If they would have been able to do that a little bit more, then I think this game would have been that much tighter.
Yeah, when they were able to get Charbonnet going in the second quarter, late in the first quarter, early second quarter, he had back-to-back 23-yard runs. One of them, as you mentioned, he put some shake and bake action on Dre Greenlaw, who is a very sound tackler. So that was a hell of a play. Gets the Rockets turned on, gets 23 yards. The next play, Derek Young and Charles Cross both gave impressive blocks on a sweep play. Charbonnet took advantage of it, another 23-yard run. But that was 46 yards. He finished with less than that for the game, because most of the time that he was getting the football, unfortunately, he had no fighting chance. The offensive line was getting dominated. That's another reason that he is on my short list, though, for 3-up, is most of the game he wasn't getting any support up front, and he still had a really solid game. Those two big runs that led to a Jason Myers field goal, and the Seahawks were ahead briefly in this football game after that. So I thought that he set the tone. They just weren't able to get that run game going again once the 49ers ratcheted things up and started stuffing them at the backfield at the line of scrimmage. They were not able to get that run game going again for the rest of the game. And I do think that that's a reason that they were not able to put more points on the board in this contest. Staying on offense for me, I think Noah Fant gets a little bit of love here. And they were talking about it on the telecast. And of course, Greg Olsen, being the future Hall of Fame tight end that he is, he was mentioning, well, the Seahawks don't get their tight ends involved very much in the passing game. It's fitting that the one drive in the second half that they were able to get a touchdown on, Noah Fant has a 20-plus yard reception on a wheel route, wide open. And then a couple plays later, Colby Parkinson scores on a well-executed fake double screen 25-yard score. The rest of the game, they didn't get their tight ends involved at all. The one drive that they really did, though, they marched right down the field and got themselves 6 points. Noah Fant was a big part of that. He only had 2 catches, but it just seems like good things happen when they get him the football. And, oh, by the way, he had a couple nice blocks today in the run game on Charbonnet's nice runs. He was involved in that. So, to me, all around, Noah Fant continues to outplay the production that we are seeing. And some of that's on the coaching staff not finding ways to get him more involved. But when he's had his opportunities, he is making plays. And he was one of the few bright spots today for the Seahawks on offense.
He was. And frankly, I was a little disappointed. I thought that he'd be more involved in this game. Again, as we talked about in the last week leading up to this game, that was one of the matchups that we really thought that the Seattle might be able to take advantage of. Not necessarily the tight end specifically, but just trying to take advantage of the middle of the field where the 49ers have had several different injuries to their starting safeties. And then once we learned that Drew Lock was going to be the starter, then it would make a lot of sense for Drew Lock and Noah Fant, obviously teammates of the Denver Broncos, to be able to kind of show off some of that rapport that they had demonstrated. I considered Jackson Smith and Jigba. He made some nice plays in this game, and certainly Tyler Lockett as well. But to me, as you said, Corbin, it felt like when the Seahawks prioritize getting their tight end the football, that the offense just hit another gear. And so I do think that Noah Fant has kind of quietly emerged as Seattle's top tight end this year. He certainly is their most athletic, but he has also made strides as a blocker, as you pointed out. And so to me, it was encouraging to see that type of play in this football game.
On the defensive side of the ball, I really only had one other player, and Jaron Reed was another one I considered here. But Julian Love did give up a 40-plus yard touchdown in coverage, got faked out, held George Kittle, and it didn't matter. The standout tight end fought through the hold and still ended up catching the ball and scoring a 40-plus yard touchdown. So that was a negative for him. But on a day where they gave up over 500 yards, almost 10 yards per play, Julian Love had an interception off a pass deflection that went off Brandon Ayuk's hands, a really nice diving interception. He also showed a great effort with Ayuk on a 30-yard catch in the fourth quarter, punching the football out of his hands, and Reek Woolen recovered it. The Seahawks offense was given chances. They unfortunately got no points off of either one of those turnovers, but Julian Love has got to get a little love here for what he did on the defensive side of the ball, creating both turnovers for the Seahawks, even if it was an uneven, imperfect effort from him. Now, as far as the 3 down goes, Rob, you and I were talking about it before the show. I know there's one position group in general that jumped out to you that in this game you felt like was a huge hindrance for the Seahawks trying to get things going on offense?
Yeah, and again, I hate to keep going back to our matchup Wednesday shows, but we know what we're talking about here, and we talked about this. This was a possible area in which the Seahawks should have been able to exploit the fact that the 49ers were missing one of their best defensive linemen, in Eric Armstead, and yet Seattle's guards were horrific in this football game. And let's not sugarcoat things. I mean, whether it be at the left side with Damian Lewis, the right side, sometimes it was Anthony Bradford for the most part. It was a disappointing performance. Certainly Seattle was able to get some push occasionally, but not with any type of consistency to be able to allow Shane Waldron, a play caller, to be able to consistently run the football and provide Drew Lock with some semblance of a balanced offense to be able to have some kind of success. And so the biggest reason for that is because the 49ers, almost regardless of who they put in at the defensive tackle position, the Seahawks guards were not able to get consistent push. And then in pass protection, all the 49ers had to do, it's not like it was real creative. They just moved Nick Bosa inside, and then it was just like tear your hair out time, because the Seahawks couldn't do anything against that formation defensively for the 49ers. So to me, there's a lot of players you could highlight here, but I thought Seattle's guard play basically ruined this game from the outset.
And I'm going to go to the defensive side of the ball. And I know that it's become a broken record on this podcast this season, but when your highest paid players are your safeties, and that is supposed to be a strength for you on your football team, and you are getting little to no production from the players there. Julian Love had those 2 turnovers. You can't say the entire safety group completely failed today, but I talked about that first play. Jamal Adams, you want to talk about beyond over pursuing. I don't know what he was doing on that play that allowed Christian McCaffrey to cut back, and then there's just a sea of green for him to run through. But that play was a microcosm of this entire game for Jamal Adams. He was constantly out of position. Every time that they blitzed him, for the most part, the 49ers seemed to have an answer. The one time that he did get back there, he wasn't able to get a hand on Brock Purdy, who slid away from him. So when he has had chances to finish those plays on those pressures, he isn't getting the job done. And then you have that 54-yard touchdown where he got caught flat-footed staring at another receiver, and he didn't execute his assignment. Deebo Samuel runs by him. It's like stealing candy from a baby. Quandre Diggs had a big hit that forced a pass breakup early in this football game. But after that, all it was a litany of missed tackles. And a lot of those big pass plays, you're wondering, where's number 6 at here? He is not getting involved at all in the passing game, not getting pass breakups. You're not finding him anywhere near the football. It's just been a disappointing season. And I don't feel like he has had a bad year necessarily, but he is not making the impact plays, and he's missed so many tackles. And then Jamal Adams, he flexes at an opponent after giving up a 7-yard catch, and then Deebo Samuel goes 54 yards on him literally the next play. Like the 49ers, they were flexing on Jamal Adams in this game, the entire game. They were running at him. They were designing their pass plays to go right at him. Kyle Shanahan was flexing with his play calling sheet over there and going after number 33. That is the honest truth. Again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning of the show. The biggest difference between these two teams, the high-priced players for the 49ers, they deliver the goods for their money. The Seahawks high-priced players do not, especially in these head-to-head matchups. And if your stars don't show up in this league, you can't beat really good football teams. And that's what's happening right now to the Seattle Seahawks. And I think the safeties, unfortunately, they're the poster children of this right now, because they are getting paid top dollar at their position, and they're not giving top dollar results in the back of Seattle's defense. As always, you can follow me on Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rank. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be riding solo with Monday Musings. I'll be answering your mailbag questions and much more. Make sure you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Go Hawks.